Okay. Okay. Yeah. Just wait a moment. All right. All right. Okay, we're starting Beha'alotcha, which is chapter 8 of Bamidbar. As usual, the first verses indicate problems. It's almost as though God built in questions to the first verses, which give rise to ideas which ultimately may explain a good deal of the Parsha. So as usual, we'll read the first verse, and as usual, Lubavitcher Rebbe points this out also. As usual, we'll find something extra or wrong with it. It seems to happen every time. If you just pick out part of the Torah and read it, you may not find anything off. But the first verses of each Parsha usually seem to have something odd or extra, which then may give the hint as to what the whole business is about. Okay? So we start here, Vayedaber Hashem el Moshe lemor. Daber el Aharon, speak to Aharon. And the word for speak, daber, is like order, command. It's not just casual language like omer and more. Ve'amarta I love. Then speak to him nicely. Ve'amarta. You see, you have a double expression here already. Daber ve'amarta. So this is some subject that's of quite some importance that requires a dual approach. An approach of strictness, of ordering, commanding, and an approach of conciliation, of speaking to his heart and so forth. Some say Amira is actually a language of love. It's a soft speaking, a gentle speaking to someone. Beha'alotcha es haneros. When you cause the candles to go up, would be one translation. El mul pnei ha-menorah, toward the center or face of the menorah, the trunk, ya'iru shivas haneros, should all the 7 candles cast light. Okay? So now right away we come to a very strange expression. When you make the lights go up. Why say all that? Just say, tell Aaron to light the menorah facing the center trunk. Why do you need that expression? When you cause the lights to go up. So that suggests that this is material which is not for the strict physical instruction, but more to give an idea what the whole process of the menorah is in lighting the menorah, vis-a-vis the Kohen. Okay? And some of the suggestions are like this. Beha'alotcha et hanerot, you have to not just light the candles, but you have to make them, cause them to rise. Make the candles go up by themselves. In other words, you could just put a flame to it and you'd say you've lit it. It's not enough. You have to hold it there until the thing goes up of itself. On a more general level, the idea of the menorah is teaching, casting light, ideas. So when you teach someone, it's not sufficient that you stand there holding the candle, but it has to reach a point where you can go away. The highest teacher is he who teaches his pupil or child to function without him. Light the candles until they will rise up of themselves, so you can take your taper away and the thing is going to keep burning by itself. And that's a huge, huge message. And it's a very important message in today's religious world, where the way of many Rosh Yeshivas, of many rabbis, is to train the pupil to be a carbon copy of themselves, to think the same, to do the same, even to dress the same. Some may do this purposely, others may have it happen, where the pupil imitates the teacher. So this drasha of Chazal, that the lights have to go up on their own, implies that's not the right way. The right way is you give him the tools to be able to study and to develop himself, and then he's to apply those tools in his own way. So that's one drasha on it. The Medrash Rabbah seems to take it another way. How else could I translate Beha'alotcha et hanerot? Any suggestions? How else could you do it? Let me give you another verse. Es Elohim hisalech Noach. How do you translate that verse? Back in Noah. Es Elohim hisalech Noach. How would you translate that?
Noah walking toward Hashem.
Well, you can't say Noach walked God. No, we don't walk God. So what's Es Elohim? How do you translate the word Es there? With. That's how it's usually translated. Noah walked with God. And it's interesting, I just stumbled in my example onto the same drush I just gave. The rabbis say that Avraham walked lifnei Hashem, before God, and Noach walked with God. There's a little helpless child who isn't ready to go out on his own. So daddy has to hold his hand for the whole walk. Already my 2.5-year-old wants to run away and not hold his hand. Up to now he wanted me to hold his hand. Now already he wants to not hold his hand. A little later he'll want to go before me and show me the way. So we have a very interesting thing, a parallel expression perhaps. So if you translate that Noach only walked with the Lord of nature, not God. Remember, Elohim is Hateva, is 86, the Lord of nature. Noach was a good Vermont farmer. He was a person who sensed how the Lord of nature works, and he lived a good, wholesome, natural life. He wasn't perverse like the other people of the flood generation. But still, he needed the Lord, so to speak, to hold his hand. He wasn't an explorer, a pioneer, an innovator, a missionary like Abraham, who wanted to bring the whole world back to itself and God. That's not Noach. So if we translate Es Elokim Yisalach Noach, Noach walked with God, how would you then translate this one? Beha'alotcha et hanerot. How else could you translate?
When you go up with the candles?
Right, right. And that seems to be the translation of Midrash Rabbah. And that would solve the problem of why it says, when you light the lamps. Why then did he command you to kindle lamps? This is Midrash Rabbah 15:2 on Bamidbar. In order to enable you to acquire merit. That's why it says, when you light the lamps. So I think the Midrash is translating it. Tell Aaron and really order him to do this and make him feel good about it also, that you are to go up with the lamps. How? How do you go up with the lamps? It sounds pretty, but what do you do? If you will make all 7 lights shine upon the middle trunk of the menorah, then you will go up with the lamps. So if you would, I would translate it. Tell Aaron, when you want to go up with the lamps, if you want to become an elevated leader, he is the leader. Aaron is the teacher. If you want to go up, this is what you do. Now, what the heck is the idea of that? I thought the Abarbanel's explanation would be simple and beautiful. The Abarbanel says that the 7 lamps of the menorah represent the Torah, which is the middle one, and the 6 branches of human knowledge, things like philosophy, mathematics, science, and so forth. 6 branches of human knowledge. So he says all 6 must give their light to the center, and the Torah then illuminates itself and the rest. So if one would be a great leader, he doesn't ignore the other 6. The great leader, the Aaron, the one who has to teach the people, has to get engaged in every realm of human knowledge and activity. Otherwise, he can't be a teacher of the people because he doesn't share their experience, he doesn't share their life. If he's just going to learn for himself somewhere, so maybe he doesn't have to get so involved with life. But he must be able to show them meaningful relationships between all branches of life, literally branches, the lights of life, the knowledge and civilization and culture of man, and the center branch. And each of them will give a light to the center branch, which implies indeed that if a Talmud Chacham lacks these 6 branches, it's not just that he's not secular. He's not a real student of the Torah. Because the Torah presupposes a world. It's not given to the angels. And combining that with the Midrash Rabbah, this is instructions to Aaron that if you want to, A, know the Torah, and B, be a religious leader. He's doing 2 things. You have to master all realms of knowledge and direct each realm toward the Torah, so that the Torah sheds light upon the knowledge, and the knowledge sheds light upon your understanding of Torah. Maybe I'll just give you a very almost trivial example, but the Torah gives no signs of what's a kosher fish, right? Except for fins and scales. It gives only chewing the cud and splitting the hooves by the animals. And then you have to do research. By the birds, it's even harder. There are no signs given. There's a whole list of things given, a whole list of names, which we probably have lost. Nobody knows for sure what they are. And it says these birds are traded. The Talmud, Jerusalem Talmud, says there is a way of telling that a kosher bird has an extra digit. Very simple. Etz ba'yateva. So therefore, any Torah student who's pretty good and gets to the Jerusalem Talmud, he knows to look at the birds, and if it has an extra digit, it's kosher. If that's all he does, that's where he stops. He doesn't go to books of ornithology. He stops there. Professor Sternberg, who believes in combining Torah with all worldly knowledge, he went to the books. Guess what? There's no difference. Kosher birds and non-kosher birds have the same number of digits on their claws, on their feet. So what? Either the Talmud wouldn't say such a thing just from reading books. The Talmud would have known, or they wouldn't have said it. So what Professor Sternberg said is like this. It's what the Sajid Gaon says. God gives human reason and gives a world to train us in the use of that reason. God's great audiovisual department. He gives the Torah. Both must be true. Both are from God. And both should be together. They should not disagree with each other. So if we see a disagreement between our secular studies and our Torah studies, between our scientific studies and our halachic studies, it does not mean that the science is wrong. It does not mean that the Torah is wrong. It means we're reading one of them wrong. That one of them we're not understanding properly, or we're not seeing a common element which could somehow unite them. So in this case, when he studied the bird's father, he found there is a difference between the kosher birds and the non-kosher birds. The difference is that the kosher birds are not carnivorous. At least they won't eat rodents and animals. They may eat insects or something, but at least they're not birds of prey, as you put it. They're birds which prey rather than prey. So, given that, their rear claw, the one which they clutch prey with, is atrophied. It's very weak and insignificant. It's there, but it's atrophied. And that's the difference. So that's what the Gemara means. A kosher bird has etz ba'yatera, not an extra toe, as one would quickly translate it, but a superfluous or atrophy toe, which also would be called extra. It's extra in the sense that it's no longer needed because or never was needed because this bird is not a bird of prey. So that's a simple example of how, unless you would study Torah and science, you would not understand the Torah. You'd be a Talmud Chacham who would quote to your Shalmi and all the Meforshim and know it by heart and not really know what the heck it's talking about. So that seems to be the implication of this first verse, according to the Medrash Rabbah, coupled with the Abarbanel. That when you would rise up yourself with the menorah, with all branches of knowledge, and to put it all together, then you must integrate your Torah knowledge with everything else. In my opinion, the recent persecutions by the yeshivish religious establishment of the Lubavitcher Rebbe and Rev Riskin, who is a derivative of Reb Soloveitchik, and of Rev Kook, and you can't imagine the extent of it. I remember going to Reb Tzvi Yehuda Zal's funeral, the son of Rev Kook. He lived in Geula. He was a saintly man, completely occupied with Torah, lived in a furnished room, a really saintly man. When the funeral cortege got to Geula, nobody joined it. Some people looked from the balconies. I was amazed. Here is a huge funeral of a great Gadol in Torah, of the religious Zionist persuasion, going through a neighborhood of Aguda and more Haredi than Aguda, and nobody joined the funeral. Nobody interfered, but nobody joined. So there is a rejection by that world of Rev Kook and his followers, Reb Soloveitchik and his followers, and the Lubavitcher Rebbe and his followers. And I try to think, what is the common denominator of those three? The common denominator is they are all people of Torah and Derech Eretz. The Lubavitcher Rebbe and Reb Soloveitchik, the only two Jewish leaders who most of the Jews today have heard of even, who are not just leaders of orthodoxy, but leaders of the whole Jewish people, in some meaningful sense, are the only two of the great Talmidei Chacham who have university degrees from very fine universities. Rav Kook also was a man who may not have taken a formal degree, but was heavily knowledgeable in all secular knowledge. So it seems what you have is a world which views the written text of the Torah and the formal observance of mitzvahs, of ritual mitzvahs, as virtually the entire Torah, other than being a decent person. They certainly would believe in that too. And then there's another world which is in line with what I just described in the Abarbanel, which believes that the Torah must be coupled with every realm of life. As the little sign over there says, Yafet Talmud Torah in Derech Eretz, from Pirkei Avot. Beautiful, true human beauty comes when the learning of Torah is joined with all ways of the world. That the Torah is not to be a substitute for life, but that which sanctifies it. And it's interesting, in the very accounts of the formation of the human, not just the Jewish, personality and embryo in the womb, in those very accounts, all yeshivas quote that God has an angel teach the whole Torah to the little child when it's in the womb. It doesn't say Jewish child either. Holds a candle over him and teaches him the whole Torah. The world is founded on the Torah. The Torah is of relevance to every human being. That's quoted everywhere. The second part of it is usually not quoted. The second part is the angel takes him on a grand tour. He shows him from one end of the world to the other. That's the part that's usually not quoted. So you have a double function of the angel, Torah and Derech Eretz. And looking at it maybe in a broader educational sense, every school that really is alive, a popular school, not a technical specialist school, must have an audiovisual department. It's not enough just to have words and books. They have things which engage all the senses in the learning process. And sometimes one picture is worth 1,000 words. And certain experiences may be worth more than the words. Sometimes, more important than just reading how great are your works, God, is actually to take a trip under the ocean. Very few of us can do that. Not everybody can dive. Not everybody can get to the diving place. Not everybody has the money for the diving equipment. So God, in this age, when it's time to put it all together, gave us a great gift called television. Everyone can watch Jacques Cousteau go under the sea. And they can see everything in absolutely magnificent fashion. And seeing that life under the sea, or seeing the inner workings of an ant's house, or a moth gradually going through its metamorphosis, caterpillar into butterfly, may have far more effect on the religious personality than just reading the pretty words of David. Right? Every Beit Knesset is supposed to have a window to look outside. You don't just stay in the Beit Knesset. There's to be a window to the world. And this, I think, is the very crucial issue between the religious worlds in Israeli society today and much of American and British society. Shall Torah be a way of deepening our understanding of the world, of deepening our sensitivity to it, or shall it be the possession of a group of otherworldly people to whom it would be a fantastic adventure just to ride a bicycle? This is the question. Okay, so that's our first verse, as I understand it. Now, Aaron did it exactly as instructed. And it's hard for Aaron to do it. See, this would explain something else. What's the big deal? So Aaron followed instructions. It doesn't just mean a technical act of lighting it. Of course, that's an easy thing to do. It means Aaron became that sort of person who does the very difficult job of integrating Torah with Derech Eretz. Okay? Aaron did that. And that job, Rabbi Soloveitchik said, is a very, very hard job. He said it's very easy to cut oneself off from the world, to be a person of pure religion. We have our world, they have theirs, all is black and white, and there's no problems. It's also very easy to be universal man. I'm not different. I have no special mission. I just roll with the tide, do what everybody else is doing. When in Rome, do as the Romans do. The Jewish teaching is when in Rome, do as a Jewish person always does. It's a difference. Now, the hard role is to be able to be part of everything and yet a part from it. Who says that, for example? That I'm part of everything and yet I'm a part from it. You recall? Who in the Bible says that? I'm one of you, yet I'm not. Yosef certainly implies that. He continues to speak Hebrew. He says, I'm an isolated Hebrew. But who actually puts it in those words before Yosef? Any guesses? Abraham. What does Abraham say when he wants to bury his wife and they offer him the choice burial place? He says, Ger v'toshav anochi machem. I am a stranger and a settler with you. Avram is fully part of his society. He fights its wars. He helps economically. He's a leader. They say you're a prince of God in our midst. And I am a toshav. I am a settler. I'm a good American, Englishman, whatever I am. On the other hand, I'm a stranger with you. I have a different drummer. My heart beats to something else. And I'm living in a whole world which the average person isn't living in. And he pays for it, yeah. In the end, he's alone. So Abraham is 100% part of his world and 100% apart from his world. Why? Because ultimately Abraham's attitude, this is said in the context of burial, of death. Abraham's attitude to life itself is, I am a stranger and a settler with you. Like the story I always tell about the Chavetz Chaim, where the rich man came to visit the great rabbi, and he saw the great rabbi, like Rev Cook I mentioned before, with a few sticks of furniture, living in really very, very simple way. And he says, where's your furniture? And he says to the guy from America, where's yours? He says, I'm on a trip. So am I. I am a stranger and a settler in this world, Abraham is saying to them at the moment of burial. I live in the world of eternity where soul survives body, and the bodily trip is just a brief passage between eternities. As such, I can't bury with you, because burial indicates our ultimate attitudes toward life and survival of the soul and so forth. And I'm in a different place, literally in a different place from you. So this is apparently the message of the menorah also, that it combines all realms of human experience and knowledge, but only when you have the unifying element of the Torah can they be combined. Knowledge is a bad thing. Science is a bad thing if it's taken without a spiritual experience. Witness Germany. The most advanced society, intellectually, culturally, classical music, great art, great science. To get a PhD, you had to know German in the early century, part of the century. Somehow, all that resulted in the Holocaust. All that resulted in something way below what the most so-called savage peoples on earth would have done. And this is a basic Jewish teaching, that any intellectual experience, any learning, without God awareness being coupled with it, is doomed to failure. It's man's attempt to be arrogant, man's attempt to feel he has power and knowledge, and not to recognize his dependence and connection to God. Okay, so that's the message, a message of the menorah. Indeed, the menorah's position in the tabernacle indicates that. Does anyone remember? How is the menorah situated in the tabernacle? What's across from it?
It's north to south.
There's a controversy whether it's an east-west or north-south orientation as to which is the western candle, which never goes out. But what is it opposite?
The table.
The table. What's on the table?
Bread.
Bread. 12 breads changed every week. So the table, which has a little crown above it, is the symbol of the crown of power, the crown of riches. Okay? Keser Malchus. The menorah is the symbol of the crown of light, of knowledge, of Torah. Somehow those must interact. So in the tabernacle in itself, you see the image of beautiful is the way of Torah with the way of the earth. Because the table symbolizes the earthliness, and the menorah symbolizes the spirit, the intellect, and so forth. Okay? And Rav Hirsch carries it a step further. Yafet Talmud Torim Derech Eretz. Rav Hirsch interprets Derech Eretz literally to mean farming. If you remember with Yisachar and Zebulun, he said Yisachar wasn't supported by Zebulun. Yisachar was a farmer and a Torah scholar. And the combination produces the well-rounded man of spirit who partakes both of the Lord of nature and the God of infinity and relationship. Paradoxically, it's the God of infinity who is closest to man, not the Lord of nature with his impersonal laws. Okay? And the two things together make you great if you don't have to be bogged down haggling and selling your produce. And the function of Zevulun, as you remember, was as the great merchant to do Yisachar a favor and market his produce in the good markets abroad where he exported other things. And then, when he had visiting dignitaries, businessmen, he brought them to his brother so that they could imbibe the spirit of Torah, which so much prevailed his brother's religious kibbutz. Okay? So that's a bit on the subject of Torah in Derech Eretz. The menorah is to be of one piece. It's beaten out of one piece of gold. No other implement in the tabernacle has such a law. The ark had a separate cover from the body of the ark. The table could be made of many pieces. The bronze and gold altars could be piecework. But the menorah had to be of one piece. Again, it's that same idea, that all knowledge must be seen as interrelated, and all so-called secular knowledge must be seen as the audiovisual part of God's great school of teaching, the Torah. So the menorah being of one block of gold, and gold indicating purity, that the intellectual process, the truth-seeking process, cannot be stained. And that, in my opinion, is why the basic Jewish law is that no one is to take money for teaching or learning Torah. I mean, there's lots of mitzvahs. To be a plumber is a mitzvah. I'm doing kindness for people. I can be a shochet. I can prepare kosher meat. I can take money for that. I mean, ultimately, if you could not take money for mitzvahs, you could never take money for anything. Because I think I could define any gainful profession as a mitzvah. At least gemilas chasadim, helping people. But the special problem with Torah is that depending on it for one's prestige and or livelihood will give one the tendency to distort it, to make a better prestige or livelihood, to say what's acceptable, to say what the guys paying the money really want to hear. That is the danger. And that, in my opinion, is why only the teaching of Torah is singled out for that prohibition of gaining from it, making it a spade to dig with or a crown to glorify yourself with it. Okay? And the Rambam, who was the one, perhaps, who was most insistent on exploring truth, even sometimes against accepted convention, and Rav Hirsch, who was similar to him, and Rav Soloveitchik, are three people in different places and times, all of whom so much insisted that the ideal of Torah is that one have some other profession or business as a way of making a livelihood. So it must be one block of pure, solid gold, then carved out to make the menorah. Of course, when it speaks of branches of the menorah, what's a branch? Anybody? Here it just speaks of the 7 candles. Elsewhere it speaks of kinei ha-menorah, the branches of the menorah. What's a branch?
It supports the light.
Yeah, but I look at the word branch. Where do I get my associations from for branch? From a tree. Now I look at a tree. What does a branch look like? Well, it could look 2 ways at least. One way is curved around, something like the end of my glass frame. And the other way, there's trees whose branches come out at a 45-degree angle, and they're absolutely straight. So there's nothing in the text itself which would indicate the shape of the branches, whether they're straight tubes or whether they're curved. On 2 walls of our ex-Crusader center here, we have menorahs. The one at the end here is straight, has straight branches, which is the version of the Rambam and is the version of Rashi. In the other room, we have the one like Titus's Arch and the Ibn Ezra, which has curved branches. Now, everything in the tabernacle, in the Mishkan, everything has a life element in it and an inanimate element. Everything is wood, covered or plated with gold or bronze or silver or something else. Except the menorah. The menorah has no physical life in it. There isn't a piece of wood in it. Yet I say physical life is in it. According to my whole exposition that the menorah is to include every part of life, it should have something of organic life. What does it have? The shape of a tree. Since it's the realm of ideas, it doesn't deal with the actual physical substance of the tree, wood, but what it has is the shape of a tree. And it's interesting, they found that in the state of Israel grow both type of trees. So the question may still be open. When it speaks of branches, The term branch, as experienced in the nature of the land of Israel, can either be a curved entity or a straight entity.
Except the first menorah was not made in Eretz Yisrael.
Right.
So they might, what
Its ultimate destination was in Israel.
did they have as an example to copy from? They didn't have
Now,
shoes.
the example, Ketavni, God says to Moshe, as the picture I showed you in the mountain. But I'm saying we now, looking back, or trying to figure out later just what this was all about, since we don't have the menorah anymore. It's been lost, at least temporarily. So I would suggest one approach would be to use the term branches, and I would assume God was referring to trees as they would be experienced in Israel, which is his setting for the ideal Torah life. According to the Ramban, all the mitzvahs are only rehearsals outside of Israel. That the true performance of any mitzvah is in Israel. Because remember, we're supposed to be a model nation. Mamlechet Kohanim v'Goy Kadosh, a kingdom of priests and a holy people in the land of Israel. So this national role model task can only be done in Israel. When the Jews in exile, he's not doing his thing of being a model nation. Maybe a model individual, a model family, a clan. But our whole nation is only together in this land. This is the only place it will happen. And therefore, even Florida, Borough Park, places where there's big concentrations of Jews probably do have a certain holiness. But it's not Israel. And the Torah is given to be lived in the land of Israel. So, then we go on with taking the Levites, the Leviim, from out of the rest of Israel, and as Sadia Gaon and others have pointed out, after numbering the whole people in Bamidbar, what we're doing in Beha'alotcha here is getting, in fact even in the last week's portion, is to single out all the special groups and special functions. We first had the general function, then we have the special functions of the Kohanim, Leviim, and so forth. And bad special functions, people who have sinned, people who have done wrong, people who are tameh, who are unclean on Pesach Sheni. So in the special things now, the Leviim are selected for their inauguration. And all the details of their inauguration are given. What's interesting is the whole history of the Leviim. There's a very strange passage, very unusual passage in the Rambam, where he traces God's mission and its leaders. Avraham finally hands it over to Yitzchak. And Yitzchak finally hands it over after much hesitation to Yaakov. And Rivka sends Yaakov out in the world to become Yisrael, who has struggled with God and man, who becomes a model of Torah and Derech Eretz, where her husband wanted to keep Yaakov in the kollel, to keep him a simple man who sits in tents, and let Esav run the world and give donations, even the tithes of salt. Yisrael, according to the Rambam, hands it down to Levi. That Levi is his successor. And that Rambam I always found very difficult to reconcile with the plain sense of the Torah. Because in the plain sense of the Torah, Levi is no good in Yaakov's time. Yaakov chews him out on his deathbed. He's angry, he's impetuous, he's a wild man. He kills Shechem and he tries to kill Yosef along with brother Shimon. They unite for bad purposes. It's only after Yaakov's rebuke, after they become a national entity, after the golden calf, when the firstborn sin and lose their religious leadership, it's only then that we see Levi come to prominence. Very strange thing. Did you remember how many Levium there were counted from 1 month old?
22,000.
22,000. Last time we centered on the fact that, gee, that's very few, because all the other Jews who were counted only from the age of 20 were at least in the 30s and up to the 70s of thousands. So why so few Levium? And last time I gave the theory, my theory, putting all the Midrashim together, that very few Levium left Egypt. That when Rashi speaks of evil people who were killed during the plague of darkness because they wouldn't leave, they would not go to Israel, my assumption is that refers to Levium, because the Medrash Rabbah says those who had patrons, those who had it good in Egypt are the ones who didn't leave. And another place the Medrash says the ones who had it good, who weren't put into slavery, were the Leviim. So putting 2 and 2 together, even though they were very pious, and they only ate glut and only davened in the shtibel, and they only would live maybe in Goshen Green or a place like that, nevertheless, these are the people who didn't want to make aliyah, and they wanted to stay in a very unclean land instead of coming to a land of purity, and ultimately they died. But those who would give up the position and wealth of Egypt, those Levium who went out, are the ones who are made of really great material. They didn't leave slavery, they left luxury. Those who left luxury to come to Israel are the ones who should be the leaders of the next generation. So that might explain it. And the warlike traits of Shimon and Levi might indeed explain why Pharaoh let them go. If they're not religious leaders, why was there an exemption for them? And why would Pharaoh care about the Jewish religion anyway? My assumption is Pharaoh took them as mercenaries, as advisors on how to build his army, much as the Union of South Africa might do with Israelis today, or other countries, Ceylon and so forth. So the picture I get is it's again Torah and Derech Eretz. And Moshe's the strong man whose spirit, his physical spirit and his eyes don't weaken at 120. The Levium were very strong, tough, fighting, capable people. And as such, they had it good in Egypt, and Pharaoh used them. And they didn't want to leave Egypt. But those few who did, and combined this great physical strength, this great aggressive strength, with Torah, went on to become the leaders of the Jewish people. That's how I would see it, something like that. So the Levium are now singled out. It's interesting. We just had in last week's portion another special person. Do you remember whom? Who were the special people featured last week? The Sotah, the wanton woman, the woman who causes grave doubts to arise about her marital fidelity. And who follows her? Nazir, the Nazarite. The Nazarite is the Jew who wants to take a Cohen-like role, a super holy role. What's the difference between the Levi and Cohen on the one hand and the Nazarite on the other? Like you see a basic contrast in what's done to them. What's the contrast? In their very persons. What's the law about the Nazarite's person? And the Sotah, the wanton woman. Yes, but there's something else. Their hair, what happens to their hair?
They don't cut it.
Don't cut it. The Nazarite's holiness is defined by not cutting his hair. And the Sotah is to let her hair grow loose, wild. She has no discipline. Right? The Kohen and Levi have the opposite law. Kohen Gadol has to have a haircut like every day. A regular Kohen maybe once a week or something. I don't remember exactly. His laws for a king, a Kohen. And what do we do to induct the Levi? We shave all the hair off his body. So hair may represent, I heard once a talk from Shlomo on this subject of hair in the Torah. Hair, as that famous movie is called, may represent the flowing of the mind, the creative spirit, the undisciplined, untrammeled spirit. In a book called The Strawberry Statement, the fellow made a very interesting study, and he saw that short hair was never really in vogue until World War I, when it was done as a way of curbing individuality, making everyone feel the same. In the First World War, where mass man was involved, where individual man had to be somewhat obliterated, okay? So long hair is one way, or letting the hair grow, in which one expresses his personality. So it could be the flowing personality, and sometimes the overflowing personality, the diuretic personality, has to have his hair flow to show what he is, like the Nazarite, but basically he's a wild person who must then take an ultra-rigid framework and unusual restrictions like not even drinking wine or grooming himself in order to curb his basically wild self. And that, as I recall, is the Meshech Chochmah's approach to Nazir. That it's an institution which is basically bad, but people who are the other way, who are basically wild, have to put themselves into ultra-rigid frameworks to get somewhere back near the middle. They can't trust themselves to take a drink. They have to let their hair grow. Whereas the Levi and the Kohen may represent the ultra-disciplined personality who cuts the hair. Some say the Levi had to have his hair shaved because another special person who we discussed recently, or not so recently, had to have his hair shaved. Who was that? The Mitzorah, the one who had Sara'at. After his physical infirmity caused by his moral infirmities was cured, After that, there was a shaving of all his hair as part of a purification, right? So since the firstborn had moral sin, they worshiped the calf and so forth, so the Levi has to do a similar atonement process to that which is done for the Mitzvah. Idol worship is like murder and so forth and so on, and like the sins of Lashon Hara. So the Levi is inducted. Now, a new aspect which Rashi mentions this week, which I didn't mention last week, an interesting coincidence, is there's a notion that the tzaddikim, the righteous people, are the bearers of God's chariot. The vision we saw in Ezekiel last week in Yecheskel of the divine chariot, Maseh Merkavah, the divine chariot is ultimately borne by the righteous ones of Israel. And there's a drasha that you need 22,000 of them. Okay? Rise, God, to the thousands and 10,000s of Israel, Moshe says, right? Return to the thousands and 10,000s of Israel. Thousands is at least 2,000. And 10,000s is at least 20,000. So putting it together, you get at least 22,000 righteous Israelis as the setting in which God's presence is really apprehensible, really descends. So the 22,000 Levi'im comes out to be the minimum number which sustains God's chariot. And probably there's also a relation, of course, to what else? To the 22 letters of the alphabet with which the world is created. So the number 22, at least in mystical sources, but this one's brought by Rashi, actually has all sorts of significance here. And Levium number 22,000 plus 300 firstborn Levium, who can't substitute for the other firstborn. Okay? Here we have, in 8:23, God spoke to Moshe saying, this is what pertains to the Levites. I'm on page 546. From 25 years old and up, he'll come to perform communal service in the service of the Ohel Moed, of the tent of appointed meeting. And at 50 years he retires. Rashi explains, it doesn't mean he really retires. He stops doing heavy work. He just does the lighter work. He'll keep guard, but not actually carry the heavy utensils. Is there a problem with that verse 24? Again, God spoke to Moshe saying, this is what pertains to Levi, from 25 years old and up, he'll do his work. Is there a problem? Yeah. When are the regular Jews counted for military service? 20. And there's intimations that when 70,000 died at the end of the book of Samuel, when David counted them, it's because he mustered troops as teenagers, 13 or so according to the Ramban, as Khomeini does. Not that they can't fight well. What's wrong with it? What's wrong, in my opinion, is they can't combine Torah with Derech Eretz at that age. They can't fight as holy fighters. That's a huge job for a teenager to be able, as Reb Soloveitchik described, I began to mention it before, to be able to blend the opposites. To be able to be a real strong, hard fighter and to really regret the whole thing and understand that your real purpose is to bring man back to himself and God. That's a very difficult role. Like the role of the worldly Torah Jew. It's very easy to say I'm just like everybody else. It's very easy to say I'm absolutely different from everyone else. To say I'm one of you, I'm a Toshav, and simultaneously a stranger. That's a hard job. And that's why numbers were never the characteristic of great people. Gemara says, I've seen great people, and they're very few. And if we define great people as those who put together Torah in the world, that's a hard juggling act. Okay? So what is the problem anyway with this 25 years? The Levi has a much more serious function than an average Jewish soldier to deal with the highest part of the Jewish people, the tabernacle and the service. So he starts at 25. Is there something wrong? Any guesses?
Why is he not up to 25?
That's also a good question. Why not go in the army for 5 years in between? So apparently we do have a notion here that the military service would somehow upset his being able to be a Levi. But the Torah only says a Levi is to lead this ultra-holy life, and even he is to run the town for people who commit negligent homicide to work themselves out. So he's still supposed to work with the average person. He teaches the law to the Jews. He's not isolated in the kollel. You might say that he's preparing all the time, because we count the Levium from 1 month up. Now that was to replace the firstborn, who were counted from 1 month old. But it also may be that from infancy he was raised specially to be a Levi. But the question still is there. Why not be a soldier for 5 years? But is there another technical difficulty with this verse? Is that when Levi starts at 25? Or did we read something else in the census of Levium? 30. Elsewhere it says he starts at 30. So Rashi attempts to reconcile it by saying at 25 he gets training. He goes to school for 5 years. And at 30 he actually does the work. And Rashi says we learn another law from this. If it takes 5 years to become a Levi, and Levi's main function is what? Not just to run the tabernacle. You don't need so many Levium for that. You don't need thousands of thousands of them. His main function is to teach Torah. Like Reb Soloveitchik, Levium teach Torah. Like Reb Kook, Levium teach Torah, like, and so forth. So if the Levi is to be the Torah teacher, and it takes him 5 years preparation, that's a sign if a person does not master the Torah and it goes hard for him. Don't worry. It should take you 5 years. But if after 5 years you don't see a sign of blessing, so maybe that's not your function, to be primarily a Torah teacher. That's how Rashi learns from this. So we have Levi counted from 1 month, from 25, and from 30 years old. And that finishes chapter 8 of Bamidbar. Now we go on to chapter 9. God spoke to Moshe in the wilderness of Sinai in the 2nd year after Exodus in the 1st month, saying, let the Jews keep Pesach again. We now came to the 2nd Pesach in history. What problem is there with that verse? Chapter 9, verse 1, about Pesach 2. Not Pesach Sheni, but Pesach 2. Was the 14th of Nisan coming around? Time to do it again. This was the first commemorative Pesach. The first one was experienced as part of the going out of Egypt. What problem is there? God spoke to Moshe in the wilderness of Sinai in the 2nd year after their exodus from Mitzrayim in the 1st month. Does anyone remember how this whole book starts of Bamidbar? The whole book. How does it start? Look back to the very beginning of the book. On page what? Page 513. Can you read it?
וידבר אדוני על משה במדבר סיני, באוהל המועד, באחד לחודש, השני בשנה השנית, לצאצא מארץ מצרים לאמור.
Translate. Read the English.
Very similar. God spoke to Moshe in the wilderness of Sinai in the tent of appointed meeting on the 1st day of the 2nd month in the 2nd year of the exodus from the land of Mitzrayim, saying. Okay,
what problem is there now? That's the first verse in the whole book of Bamidbar, and we just read the first verse in chapter 9. What problem does that raise? Right. Right. We're going back in time a month. Why not first tell about what happened in the 1st month of the 2nd year, the beginning of chapter 9, and then tell about what happened in the 2nd month of the 2nd year, the census with which the book starts? That's the question, very simply. So Rashi says, in general, there is no chronological order in the Torah. The Torah goes by subject relatedness, maybe even the stream of consciousness thing, like in Joyce. All right? And Rashi says this verse shows it. The Ramban says the opposite. The Torah does speak in chronological order, except when, like here, it clearly says it's not, and then it has a special reason for not speaking in chronological order. But even according to Rashi, where the Torah stresses the dates, so the Torah is concerned when these events occur. So there must be a reason why the Torah is, so to speak, out of order here. So that's the question. So Rashi says that this story involves some sad business. There was sad business in general. When was the Mishkan erected? Do you remember? The 1st of Nisan. All right? The 1st month. So this is about the time of the erection of the Mishkan. And that had troubles associated with it. For example, Nadav and Avihu died. So there were bad events. So the Torah doesn't want to start out with the story of bad events. So put this off till now. And the real bad event, of course, is that this second Pesach, according to many or most, was the only Pesach they were to keep. That the remaining 38 years of the desert wandering, they did not celebrate Pesach. No. After this, after all the sins and everything, there was no more Pesach until they came to Israel. This is the only one mentioned, okay? So this is a sad story. So God wants to start out accentuating the positive and start in a positive note. That's, anyway, what you'll find in Rashi. So, Moshe tells them to make the Pesach with all the regulations, just like you did last year when you went out of Egypt, or almost like they didn't have to take the lamb, I think, on the 10th day now, in advance to show the Egyptians, but otherwise it was pretty much the same. And there were some men who were unclean. Some say it's the ones, El Safan, who buried Nadav and Avihu, Aaron's two sons who died and became unclean in the process. I didn't quite understand that, why it would take 2 weeks. It should take 7 days. And if it was on the 1st of Nisan that the thing happened, then it should they should be cleaned by the 8th day. All right. And these men came to Moshe and said, we're unclean. But why can't we bring the Pesach too? Because it says any person who's unclean can't participate in Korban Pesach. And did Moshe know the answer? No. Very interesting. This is one of the 4 cases where Moshe didn't know the answer to a question. So Moshe told them, I don't know. And Rashi in a few places says, I don't know. And even the greatest of men sometimes must say, I don't know. It's no shame. You're only a mortal. Al tiftechu bin divim. Don't trust even princes, ultimately. Beven adam shein lo teshua. Son of man who has no salvation. One day he's going back to earth, and that very death experience limits him. And he never can really be 100%. All right, Moshe doesn't know. There's 4 cases where Moshe doesn't know. Here, the daughters of Tzalafcha, as to female inheritance. And it's just very fine details he doesn't know if you really look into it. What punishment is to be administered to the Mekalel, the one who curses, blasphemes? And what punishment is to be administered to the Mekoshesh Eitzim, the guy who was gathering sticks on Shabbos? There's a difference. You could divide these into 2 and 2, these 4 cases. What's the difference between them, conceptually? Right? Case of the stick gatherer's punishment, the case of the daughter's inheritance, the case of the guys who are unclean on Pesach, and the case of the blasphemer. What's the difference? Could you classify these into 2 groups, these 4 cases? Think.
Blasphemer and the one getting sticks is a physical, actual doing.
Doing something wrong. And what's the question? How to punish them. The other 2 cases are people who need help. They want to participate in the inheritance of the land. The daughters of Tzalafcha are ardent Hadassah women, ardent Zionists. The guys here want to keep Pesach. They're really enthused. But they don't know what to do. So the Targum, an ancient Targum, ancient translation, mentions something here. What does Moshe say to these people? He says, wait. Just wait here. Stand by. Imdu. Veshma'an. I'll go here. Ma yitzav Hashem lechem. What God will command you. And Moshe does the same thing by the daughters of Tzalafcha, who need help. When it comes to the guys who got to be punished, Moshe does something different. He doesn't say, wait, I'm going to see how to punish you, with eagerness and zeal. He says he puts them in custody, but they shouldn't run away, and he waits till God comes to him. And if it takes 10 years, it's okay with Moshe. So Reb Soloveitchik brought out the message of this Targum, again, that a great rabbi, and Moshe is the model of a great rabbi. If I were to give a course teaching rabbis how to be rabbis, Moshe's life should be the example. So the great rabbi, he said, is very eager to help and very reluctant to punish. Quick to praise, slow to condemn, reluctant to condemn. If he has to do it, if God tells him, he does it. Just like Avram, he's told to sacrifice your son, he has to do it. But it's not what he's looking for. He said the trouble today, especially in Israel, is the rabbis are quick to condemn, this is wrong and that's evil and that's bad. And they don't really seem to much care about helping or praising anyone outside of their own immediate circles. And this is also very relevant, in my opinion, to the recent attacks on Rav Riskin's program and the Chabad Rebbe and so forth. That it's perfectly legitimate for a rabbi to say that he thinks there's something terrible if the Chama Leibowitz teaches men or rabbis. It's funny, until Rav Riskin did it, nobody ever mentioned it. She's been doing it for years in a number of yeshivas. All right, it's even okay if a rabbi says that the voice coming behind the veil, behind the pargod, in the Talmud, now should be the Chama Leibowitz. That's okay. But if they really have this spirit of Moshe, they should say, we're really sorry to say that we must disagree with the policy of Rav Riskin and we urge our pupils not to follow it. We're really sorry to say we disagree with the Chabad Rebbe's program of mass study of the Rambam, which was never done by our ancestors in Eastern Europe. So there must be something wrong with it. But they're such wonderful people, and we praise all their good works and all the wonderful things they do and how they bring people back to Torah when we don't go out of our yeshivas to do it. In other words, if they have the spirit of Moshe, they can state and should state what they think is wrong, but they should combine it with praise for everything that's right and have it in a pleasant, beautiful tone, and not let their newspapers and publications be the sources of vicious attacks on great Jewish religious leaders. And that's what the Belzer Rebbe said at the inauguration of the Bell Center in Ramema. He said, there's a funny statement in Chazal coming from the prophets that our teachers are supposed to be like Malach Hashem Tzvakot, a angel of the Lord of Hosts, and not to take anyone as your teacher if he's not like an angel of the Lord of Hosts. That's very difficult. First of all, why use that funny term, Lord of Hosts? Just say if he's like an angel. Secondly, nobody's completely like an angel, even Moshe again. Human beings. They're all human beings. There's very, very great ones. There's some pretty schleppy ones, and all kinds in between. But everybody's human. Everybody has some errors. Nobody's really like an angel who just is a robot doing God's will. As described in Haftorah of Zechariah, those people who stand, I will give you a place among those standers. People move. They go back and forth, up and down. Angels stand still and do their job. They're not flexible, and they're not tempted, but people are human. So the Belzer Rebbe said like this, what it means is the main characteristic of an angel is he understands he's part of a big organization called Tzvakot. Malach Hashem Tzvakot. And he may have the opposite function of different members of that organization. The army has its peacekeeping units, or its peacemaking units, who may try to establish liaison with the Arabs, and it has its units whose job is to wipe out the Arabs before they wipe us out. And the guy who's in the peace venture part of the army, or the foreign ministry, knows that that's his role, and he respects the guy who's in the war part, who that's his role, and vice versa. So he says you have the Malach HaMaves, the angel of death, and you have an angel of life and healing. And they each recognize that they have a role in God's great plan. And they each respect each other. We always say, V'kulam nosnim reshus zeh lezeh. The angels give permission one to the other to do their thing. They treat each other with respect and kindness, even though they have the exact opposite task. So the Belzer Rebbe said, if your Rebbe is like an angel of the Lord of Hosts, then he has his own thing, his own personality, his own unique way. So I mentioned by Nazir, Rashi's way was pro-body and life. The Ramban's way was somewhat to get away from the physical part of life. All right, but they must treat each other with respect and understand that in the great panorama of God's Torah and audiovisual Torah, what we call reality or the world, you need all of them even though they're paradoxical and contradictory. So if your Rebbe can respect and treat with dignity those whose role in life is the opposite of his, those whose role in life is to confront alien doctrines and to give rabbi seminars on comparative religion. They have their role, we have our role. But you must treat each other with respect. Otherwise, you're not fit to be the teacher of anybody. Okay? That's the Belzer Rebbe's word. Okay? So, here too, when it's to help someone, Moshe says, wait, I'll go right to God. When it comes to punishing someone, he's not in such a hurry. And then we get the law of Pesach Sheni, that they can do it again. Very strange law. It's the only thing like it in the Torah. Where someone's unclean or can't come on the first Pesach, He can do it a month later, and with matzah and maror, but he doesn't have to clean all the chametz out of his house. He can have chametz around. It's no problem. But he just goes, but if someone uses this as a cop-out and he's lazy and doesn't show up on Pesach, he's going to be in terrible trouble. Okay? And that will end this part of the class. We'll have a break for refreshments.
We found somebody coming to him. He takes this woman, flies her in, shows her pictures. Matches up.
Rich woman.
Matches up. As a rabbi, that has to be a very warm, comforting, fulfilling experience of saving a nefesh, and, making it a nefesh into a neshama, and going to the graduation or whatever it was. Graduation that he went to, a bar mitzvah, I don't know, a wedding. That, as a rabbi, that has to be one of the most fulfilling.
Okay. Rashi discusses the relationship between the beginning of our portion, Beha'alotcha, and the end of last week's, which dealt with the offerings of the 12 princes, one on each day. And Rashi says that Aaron felt bad. He felt discriminated against. He felt down when all the princes brought these wonderful offerings to dedicate the temple, and he had no role in it. That's not so simple to understand. The Lubavitcher Rebbe discusses it at length, because Aaron did have a role. He also brought sacrifices, or Moshe brought them for him during the 8 days of inauguration of the Kohanim. So he had a role, and he was to run the thing. But according to the Rebbe, he didn't have the role of inaugurator. Moshe did it, and then when he finally did the sacrifice, they had already been done, where the princes were inaugurators. Anyway, God tells him in lighting the menorah, even though according to Rashi, the menorah is only lit at night, Moshe had done it in the morning, and since Moshe did it in the morning, unusually, that did not count as an inauguration of the regular service. So he comforts him. But what's the over lesson we learn here? The last few sections, as I explained the so, dealt with the problem of discrimination. Nesoas rosh b'nei Gershon gamheim. Also lift up the heads of the sons of Gershon. Gamheim, they are also people. Gam may even stand for Gershon and Merari, the two tribes who are the assistants. Kahat is the leader who deals with the holy objects, and Gershon and Merari are the Nachshleppers, are the people who do the supportive systems. So on the one hand, the Torah singles out Kahat. It does not say in the name of some kind of fake equalization that people who are leaders should be kept back and everybody should do the same thing and learn the same thing. It's ridiculous. The leaders should be urged to do their thing and develop all their talents. But some formula has to be devised, or some social attitude which will give equal respect to the helpers, to the people who provide the infrastructure without which the leaders could not do their thing. That was our theme last week in the So. Here we have the opposite case. Sometimes it's the leader who feels discriminated against because he can't partake in what everybody else does, which is far more tangible and simple to grasp as an honor. So when Aaron sees the people who are really into wealth and power, the princes, each one donating a room in the new giant yeshiva in Bnei Brak, he feels inadequate because this very tangible, nice leadership role, he's not part of. As Reb Soloveitchik said, he wished he could, when he spoke about this, he wished he could have donated a room to Maimonides school. But that's not his thing. So that's what God tells him. Your portion is greater than theirs, and you can't have everything. You're going to spend your time trying to be a prince. You're not going to be a prince of the Torah usually. You're not to be just in Torah. You're supposed to combine Torah and Derech Eretz, but there's emphases. And we say at the end of Pirkei Avot, in one of the 48 ways in which one gets the crown of Torah, is miut Derech Eretz. Not so much worldliness. Not none, but not so much. True, as Jean said, in order to be a halachic authority in any realm, you have to be a specialist, given the great development of scientific knowledge in every realm. And indeed, any question on medicine in Torah will have to be asked of a great medical scholar who's also a great Torah scholar and so forth. But still, to really get the crown of Torah, you have to limit your outside things. Not that there's anything wrong with those outside things, but you can't do everything. So God's telling him your role is greater. Why is it greater? Because it's the menorah, the role of teaching, as we explained before, and bringing the whole world together with the Torah. That's one interpretation. There's another interpretation suggested, if I recall, by Ramban, that your role is greater, not for the menorah of the tabernacle, but someday your descendants, the Kohanim, will light which menorah? Which menorah was lit by the Kohanim besides this menorah in the tabernacle? The Hanukkah menorah. Right? So the Hanukkah menorah symbolizes something different. The prince's tabernacle eventually evolved into a temple. What happened to that temple? What happened to it? Finished. So their thing is not eternal. The Torah teaching goes on from generation to generation as eternal. The physical structures of Torah crumble. A man built a shul, it's a wonderful thing. That shul will crumble. The neighborhood will turn bad, Jews will go away. Eventually they'll be gone, at least except in Israel. All shuls are to be resurrected in Israel. The grand shuls of Germany, Poland, Russia will be no more. The teaching of the Torah in Germany, Poland, and Russia, the handing over of the spirit, the handing over of the tradition will be carried on forever. It's not physical, it's not tangible. The person feels that he's second rate because he can't be on the board of governors of the UJA who are doing such wonderful things for Israel. He can't make a project renewal. But what he's doing may have far vaster and longer lasting effects than what they're doing. A. B. It's much harder to rebuild than to build. One who's young and starting off in things and wants to build up a big enterprise or do something great, have a great romantic affair and get married, have a bunch of children, all that you can do with the energies of youth. When it all collapses, when you've experienced failure, when the business you worked so hard to build collapses, when Jews who were magnets in Germany were glad to get out with the clothes on their back and come with nothing to England or America, where it takes real strength of character and personality is to start over. Right from scratch. When the Satmar Rebbe and the Brisker Rav lost all their children in the concentration camps of Europe, wives and children just killed by the Germans. To start over and have another batch takes real great person. So to rebuild the temple and clean it up after all the Jews went with the Greeks and they wrecked everything and defiled everything, the Hanukkah story is a much greater heroic role than the building of the tabernacle. Sure, everybody's glad to do this beautiful new thing, but after failure, and that, if any of you were reading the Post in the last few days, was the theme of the new cantata by Elie Wiesel, together with someone else, on hope. Not hope to have hope. That the great contribution which the survivors of the Holocaust made to the rest of mankind is to teach them to have hope when hope made no more sense. To build again. To start families. Right after the war in the concentration camps, they started families. To go back after 1900 years and build a ruined state of Israel, ruined land of Israel. And to assume that somehow you'll pull it off and beat all those well-trained Arabs who are trying to attack you. And that you'll master farming and you'll master government, or at least enough to keep it all going. This took a hope which springs eternal in the human breast, which probably the rest of mankind could not pull off. So God tells Aaron, your portion is much greater than theirs, for your descendants will be able to rebuild after a Holocaust. That the Hasmoneans will be able to clean a temple which had been so defiled by both Jew and Gentile. And that's a much, much harder role. To have known failure and to have known defeat, and as a result to have somewhere in the back of your mind that the new thing you're doing may also result in failure and also result in defeat. And how many we read occasionally in the paper have lost their only children in the Israeli army who had lost everybody in Europe before that? Yet that hope, somehow it'll be better. That's the Jewish thing. There's a great hope. Od lo avda tikvatenu. Our hope for thousands of years is not yet lost, though it sure looked lost so. There are many times, the Crusades and the pogroms and the Holocaust and so forth. Not just to be a free people in our land, as I mentioned, but that should lead to the second refrain, Liot Am Kadosh B'Artzeinu, in the improved version of Hatikva, to be a holy people in our land. This Jewish dream, that not just the Jews will be all right someday or safe or free, but that will be part of universal existential redemption. That all the troubles in the world are going to end. That our hope is not just for a bit of relief, a bit of nachas before we die. No. Our hope is that this experience is going to bring hope, this hope within the midst of seeming hopelessness will eventually answer all the hopes of all mankind, that indeed tears will be dried from every cheek. The lion and the lamb will live together. There will be no more death in this world. It's all going to happen. And our miniature immediate hopes of reestablishing the state of Israel after the Holocaust reflect these ultimate hopes which are supposed to come out of it. Ki mitzion tetzei Torah u'devar Hashem Yerushalayim. We next go, after the laws of Pesach, to the cloud which covered the Mishkan and the fire-like glow until morning throughout the night. And only when the cloud rose from the tent did the sons of Israel journey forth. We're in chapter 9, verse 17. And wherever it settled, there they settled. Sometimes it was a long time, sometimes it was a short time. But it's the imminent presence of God which determined where the Jews stayed. And that was always the rule of Jewish history. As long as God's presence was in the Jewish camp throughout the long desert of history, throughout our long 1900-year exile, you stuck around. Things might have been rough, but if you sensed you could maintain God's presence within the Jews, you stay there. Once God's presence left the place, nobody should be in Poland today. God's presence filled every street in Jewish Poland before World War II. It no longer does. It's not a place for a Jew to be. And I would say today there may be a difference. We say, V'shachanti itam b'toch galusam, that God's presence stays with the Jews in the midst of their exile. That wherever a Jew was, in Siberia, in Australia, in England, in France, China, God's presence was there. In every little temple, every Torah embassy, every synagogue, you could find God's presence. I would say today, I intuitively sense maybe you can't. You don't really find God's presence anymore in the shtibels. Before there was a state of Israel, God's presence was found in every shtibel in Eastern Europe. Now I don't know if it is found in the synagogues of America and England and France. Why? Because God is with us throughout our exile. But it's pretty darn hard to say we're in exile when this land with all its problems is quite livable and pleasant. And how can anyone say our land is deserted and we're in exile in Tisha B'Av? Oh God, we're in such misery. And they sit there looking properly pious and sad on the ground when one way costs $400. So I would submit that today maybe God's presence can't be found in the diaspora, even though it really was found and felt in the days of Fiddler on the Roof. Because today, God returned with the Jewish people to Israel, those who wanted to come back. Because it also says that God will come back with you. V'shav Hashem eshvoscha. God will come back with your captivity, with your return. And assuming the Jewish people now can come back, finally, so I assume God's here already.
Yeah, but isn't it...
Maybe in Russia. Maybe people learning Torah in an apartment in Russia, you'd really feel God's presence.
Maybe it's a subjective thing. You feel, we feel it here. Hmm? Maybe the Jews in
Borough Park
feel it there.
Well, I'm suggesting it's not.
No.
That's all.
You're saying about Russia, it's the Shekhinah in exile.
Yeah. In Russia, they're really in exile because they can't get out.
I accept that. But what I'm saying is that this Jew in Borough Park, I don't know, but he may feel the same as you do, subjectively, and the same as the Jew in Russia.
Yeah, I would say he's, at some level though, he knows he's ignoring a huge part of the Torah. I say it's not just the formal question, is there a mitzvah to live in Israel, as the Ramban says. Let's even say there is no formal mitzvah. A woman has no mitzvah to have children either. But if someone really believes God said all that stuff, they'll want to be here, if they possibly can. So there's like a conspiracy not to talk about it too much, not to feel it. For example, in almost every siddur, there is printed before Birkat HaMazon, the grace after meals, the psalm, by the rivers of Babylon we sat down and we wept, yea, we wept, even above the Hudson River and the East River. It's an eternal condition. How can we sing the Lord's song in a strange land? In my opinion, the rabbis put it there to arouse Zionist consciousness at the weakest moment, after having a good glatt kosher meal in Muncie with all your children and nice yeshivas and everything so beautiful and Hamish. At that moment, the last thing you feel like doing is uprooting it all, the struggle with the Israeli bureaucratic and economic system. But the rabbis seem to say you should feel it. At every joyous occasion, we have an expression of our pain that Jerusalem's not rebuilt, we're not back. You break the glass at the wedding and you say Al Naharos Babel after your meals. Or Shir Hamalos on Shabbos when they didn't want to make it such an unpleasant message, such as abortions at lunch. So I would say that somewhere in the consciousness of people who can be here, but don't do anything about it, and pretend that things are just ours, they always were, there has to be something which impedes God's presence. Just like among the nasty, so-called very religious people, there must be something there which stops God's presence. Or all of us when we're doing some major thing wrong. That's my opinion anyway. And I think that, you say God, and you daven and chuckle and learn, but there's a whole part of God's message which is brushed to the side. I was shocked. I was, for example, in a community in Massachusetts, an Orthodox synagogue, where they didn't bother to celebrate Independence Day or Jerusalem Day. Well, they say a fine synagogue, not the low ones who won't say prayers for the soldiers in the stake on Shabbos. They would say the prayers, but somehow they can get around the Yom Ha'atzmaut. It wasn't a convenient evening. Everybody's busy. It's a yuppie community. And when they had a dedication of a yeshiva there, I was at the dedication of a day school, I felt bad. I felt good. It's a beautiful thing here out in the midst of no man's land. They're building a yeshiva. It is a wonderful thing. But nobody mentioned this isn't really what we want. This is only temporary. Israel wasn't mentioned. It's as though I forgot Jerusalem at the height of my joy. And that psalm says, if I forget Jerusalem, let my right hand be forgotten. The Jewish power is dissipated in a dispersed diaspora. If my tongue shall cleave to the roof of my mouth, if Jerusalem's not at the head of my joys. So, meaning the Jewish message will not be broadcast to humanity, except with a focus on Zion. Doesn't mean a person never go out of Israel, or they won't do things to help out there, but the focus, the heart of the person should be in this land. As Yehuda Levi said, I am in the west and my heart is in the east. Yehuda Levi maybe gave his life to come here. So this was the motif through all the ages. And now in the prosperous diaspora, it's very, very hard to keep consciousness raised as to the fact that you can be in Israel. That's the real Jewish problem today. You can be here. It's hard. You give up a lot, but you can be here. Okay, let's go on. The next section, chapter 10, speaks of the two trumpets, which according to a tradition in Moshe's lifetime were only blown by him. Afterwards, the Kohanim should do it, and there's different types of blowing to assemble the people, to assemble the leaders, and to carry on their journeys. Okay? Then the order of their journeys is given, and as they camp and they journey, everything centers about the tabernacle, the Ohel Moed. And after the order of their journeys, we have Moshe speaking to Chovav, the son of Ruel the Midianite, father-in-law of Moshe. And the question is Chovav the father-in-law or is Ruel the father-in-law? Anyway, whichever, we are journeying to the place of which God said, I'll give it to you. Come and we will do good with you. For God has promised good concerning Israel. The word good in some form appears 5 times, as I recall, in this passage. Okay? And they say this corresponds to the 5 portions of land which the descendants of Yisro were given around Jericho until the Jews conquered the land. But Yisro says, no, I've got to go home. And some say that Moshe urges him to stay because people will say he just went home because he's getting no share in the land. So Moshe says, I'll give you a temporary share. But Yisro's duty may be to go back to the folks back home and bring the message to them. And just as today, if a non-Jew comes to be Jewish, we discourage him. It's a hard job to be a priest of God, to be part of the kingdom of priests in the holy nation. It's hard enough for we Jews. It's darn hard. None of us do it really right. So if a Gentile wants to do it, we tell him, no, it's enough to be a Ben Noach and spread that message through the world. That the whole world has to know the Jews are their priest, and that Israel is where you find God. And as the Messianic process starts, economically it's probably a good time to sell short holdings in Vatican tourist enterprises. Man will no longer go to the Vatican for religious inspiration. He'll come to the real thing, to the real place. And this is a big problem that the Catholic Church has. They don't want Israeli tour guides to take their groups. They want to, as much as possible, put down modern Israel and just show their Christian holy sites. Because as people go through modern Israel, suddenly the Catholic message is shown to be wrong. God did not change his mind. God is bringing the Messianic process exactly as described in the Tanakh. Israel is being rebuilt. The Jewish people are coming back. The one who was rejected as old and obsolete is suddenly seen as the one place in the world where God is still alive and well in Jerusalem. So the church has very big problems with this whole process. And economic problems as well, because their religious center, their place of pilgrimage, is in the midst of the decadent society of La Dolce Vita in Italy, in the capital of the kings of Rome, of Asaph's descendants, who the Bible says will be judged. So there's a very big problem now for the Vatican as people discover the real thing. And modern communications and travel make Israel a very real possibility. And Catholic pilgrims would much rather come here than to the land of Asaph and La Dolce Vita. So Yisro goes back to teach the folks back home that the Jews indeed are the way that you reach God. If you remember, what made Yisro come? When he heard that Amalek fought the Jews. Afterwards it says the victory over Amalek. But the first thing he heard was that Amalek went out to fight the Jews. And one way you know the quality of someone is by who his enemies are. So if Amalek went out to fight the Jews from far off, and the Jews had no effect on him, that shows that this was a people of God, and Amalek was determined to keep the pagan spirit in the world alive. Rashi says here later that God's enemies means the enemies of the Jews. Because someone who hates the Jews hates he who spoke and the world was created. What does Rashi mean by that, in my opinion? That the Jewish message is that there is a creator who cares what you do. And that life is not just to be led according to your whim or impulse or pleasure. And the pagan spirit, the spirit which Hitler so much tried to revive after the Jews had wrecked it, that pagan spirit doesn't want to hear about the God who spoke and the world was created, who created a world with 10 divine words, a world of planning and divine concern, where what one does is darn important. So that spirit wants to stop that message. And that message that life has meaning and purpose and hope again is broadcast by the Jewish people. And he who wants to stop that message tries to stop the Jewish people. In previous ages, the Amaleks tried to stop Shabbos and bris milah, circumcision. They tried to make up stories about Pesach to stop us from keeping Pesach, the blood libels. They stopped us from learning Torah. Shabbat. Today they don't give a darn if you do that stuff. Doesn't matter. Religion doesn't bother them because they know the Jewish people is away from it. What bothers them is one thing, Zionism. They say we don't hate Judaism, only Zionism. And Reb Soloveitchik said if the modern day Amaleks, the ones who killed Jewish children, hate Zionism so much, this is a sign that the Satmar Rebbe is 100% wrong and Rev Kook 100% right in that Zionism is the slow and painful way by which God makes the horn of salvation grow like a plant. Matzbiach Keli Yeshua. If it's so hated, it's a sign that indeed this is the divine way of bringing about the redemption and the Messianic era. So Yisro apparently goes home. Some say he converted. It's not clear exactly what he does in the end. Then they journeyed 3 days, and the Ark of the Covenant went ahead of them a 3 days journey. According to Rashi, that Ark of the Covenant is a separate ark with the broken tablets which went out for war with the Jews. That the main ark never left the camp with the whole tablets. And that would give the idea perhaps that war, as I said, is a temporary sad measure like broken tablets. It's not our ultimate goal. It's a necessary goal to protect the nations from themselves, because if they wipe out the Jewish people, they ultimately have no future to get back to themselves and to Gan Eden. Right? And then we have in inverted nuns 2 verses which some say are a separate book in the Torah, so that there are 3 books in Bamidbar. And we're now up to 10:35. Vayehi b'soah Haron, when the ark would journey forward, Vayomer Moshe said, Kuma Hashem, come God, v'yafutzu oivecha, let your enemies be wiped out. V'yanusu misanecha mipanecha, let them run away from before you. And Rashi points out here, God's enemies refers to the enemies of the Jews, who ipso facto are enemies of God, as Hitler very clearly shows in Mein Kampf. Uvnuchol Yomar, and when it would rest, he would say, it shall be said with the language of love, Shuva Hashem, return God, or rest. Rivavot, in the 10,000s, Alfei, thousands of Yisrael. Again, 22,000 minimum. This idea that God's presence rests, the chariot of God, requires 22,000 good Jews, which corresponds to the number of Levi'im, other than the firstborn Levi'im, who now entered God's service. Okay? We're up to chapter 21. Now, after this set-aside little book of the Torah, we come to the kvetchers. Vayhi ha'am k'misonanim ra be'oznei Hashem. The people began to complain bitterly and angrily. Ha'am may refer not to the Jews, but to the hangers on the Erev Rav who accompanied them. And then the Jews sort of mimic them or are affected by them. And God gets angry here. This relates to our subject of Shavuos night, anger. And the problem that man is not to have anger, and God has anger everywhere. Vayichar apo, his face perhaps, apa, his face showed anger, may be a general solution to the problem of divine anger. That it's a put on. That God displays anger, but at the essence of his being there is no anger. And the Rambam, who's so much against anger, says people should also display anger when it's necessary to correct children and pupils and so forth. But if they never should do it, if there's a danger that they'll get carried away. God doesn't get carried away. But for man to emulate God in this realm is very, very difficult, because man, when he begins to feign anger, will suddenly find himself in the grips of anger. And anyone who gets angry is as though he worshipped idols. He's out of control. God doesn't control him anymore. Impulse controls him. No. God was angry, so to speak, and a fire came out and devoured some of the people. Moshe prayed, the fire calmed down. They call it Tavera, because there was a divine fire there. And then the rabble who they took up, the people who went along with the Jews when everything looked so good, all began to cry and weep. We want meat. They had divine food, man. They wanted meat. It's a good vegetarian argument here. Remember the fish we used to eat, but they also mentioned the cucumbers and the melons, the leeks of the onions and the garlic. So even vegetarianism is sort of grossly material here. And now we have nothing except this man. And it describes the man. And then it went to a new stage. Not just individuals fetching that they want a good deli in the midst of Jerusalem. And they'll leave Jerusalem for New York because you can't get a good corned beef sandwich here. It gets worse. Or you don't have a wonderful vegetarian restaurant like you'll find the Cauldron in Greenwich Village. So then Moshe heard the people weeping in verse 10 within their families, by their families. Vayishma Moshe Hasam Bochel Mishpachosav. They made family demonstrations. Each lepesach oholo, each at the entrance to his tent. And then God got really angry. Ma'od. And Moshe felt terrible, devastated. V'nei Moshe ra. Rashi points out that the weeping by or for their families is that the Jews at this stage in the desert, the generation that had gone out of Egypt, were weeping because of the family laws, because they no longer could practice incest. That the Jews in Egypt had sunk to the level of the Egyptians and were quite incestuous. If you remember, Moshe's father even married his aunt, which was a relationship which would later be forbidden to the Jews. It wasn't forbidden then to non-Jews because of paternal relationship, not a maternal. But still, a fine person probably wouldn't do it because the Torah calls all the prohibitions later abominations, which the Egyptians did. So we see how the Jews were affected. Even of the tribe of Levi, and very fine ones, Moshe's parents, were into these things. So Rashi brings commentators who say that the Jews wept for their families means they wept about the incest laws. Yeah. Gives us some idea where they were at. So Moshe says it's too much. He says, look, I need help. And if they want meat, how can they get meat? Rabbi Kippur says Moshe actually doubted in his weakness. Others, Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, if I recall, says, no, Moshe didn't doubt. But Moshe is telling God that it won't help. Like I said before, trying to appease the non-derech eretz, non-Zionist rabbis won't help. So Moshe says here, no matter what you do, God, they won't be satisfied. You give meat, they'll want fish. You give fish, they'll want meat. Whatever you do, they won't want it. Plus, Moshe may doubt if God can do it in a natural way. And here, the Jews weren't on the level anymore to be worthy of miracles. It's almost from this point on of the kvetching that they begin to go from a miraculous existence toward a more natural existence because they wish to distance themselves from God just as Adam did in the Garden of Eden. And God said, "Forges unto hate." He acceded to his request, let him run away from home, and put the angel with the flaming sword to guard the way to the tree of life that should still be there when man's ready to come back for it. Others say why this was so terrible for Moshe. He said, God, how can you feed this entire people? He's saying, God, how can you feed them and then kill them? That here, God, you're going to do an act of kindness and give them meat and fish and all these vegetables and then kill them? The idea of a last supper to Moshe is so hypocritical. Here, I'm being nice to you and stabbing you in the back at the same time. And then God says, look, my glory comes first. Perhaps it's not the nicest thing to do, but if I don't give it to them, people will say God could not supply them with it. Anyway, God gets him 70 men to help him. And then he says, this food that you so much crave, and you don't want the holy food of the month, is going to be your downfall and devastation. And so was it. Some say the better ones died right away, the others had long suffering, some say the opposite. Anyway, loads of them died who were the real fressers, the ones who really gave up everything they had here in the desert for a good corned beef sandwich with pickles from the east side. Then the problem was there were to be 6 men from each tribe who were to prophesy. If you take 12 tribes, 6 men each give 72, but there's only supposed to be 70 elders. So either a raffle was held to determine who are the 2 out, or according to some traditions, 2 of them said, it's okay, we don't want the couple, Eldad and Medad. But since they had been from the 72 chosen, God's presence was upon them. And they began to prophesy in the camp. And Moshe's son, according to some Gershon, said, they're uttering words of prophecy in the camp, not in the tent. And Yeshua said, wipe them out. Rashi says, make them public leaders. That'll wipe them out. That'll kill all their spirit and religiosity. Just make them public communal leaders. I don't know where he gets it from. And Moshe said, are you jealous for my sake? I wish all the people were prophets. And that indeed is what the prophet Joel says will happen in the end of days. That we won't have to have any more rabbis. We won't have to have any more teachers. That all your sons and all your daughters, women too, all will know God and prophesy. That's our dream. And Genesis Rabbah 98.9, if I remember, says that the Mashiach is not coming to teach the Jews. The Mashiach just has to pull the Jews out of the Golus and make them make Aliyah. Once most of the Jews or all the Jews get back to Israel, God will meet with them directly. All your sons and all your daughters will be prophets. And all the Mashiach will have to do, this great human teacher, is to teach the non-Jews their 7 laws, what they have to know. Because they still need a connection with the man, with the Rebbe. But the Jews won't need this anymore. So Moshe and the Jews withdrew from the camp. Before, the people died from the corned beef craze, let's call it, and the quail were brought with the wind. The elders and Moshe withdrew so that they should not have to experience the evil. As David says, not only, he knows there's evil in the world, but he says, Lo ra'isi tzadik nezav. I never saw the tzaddik forsaken and his children seeking bread. He praises God that he never had experienced the terrible moment, because if he did, maybe he couldn't write Tehillim. That's one answer. The other answer is, I never saw the tzaddik forsaken, even when his children did go up in the Holocaust. Again, like the Satmar Rebbe and the Brisker Rav. That the tzaddik has such faith that even when his children are seeking bread, he still can carry on and doesn't feel that God has forsaken him. So anyway, then the meat was still between their teeth and God's anger broke out and there was a terrible blow there. And then Moshe and Aaron, with good motives, spoke out against Moshe for being celibate, for abandoning his wife, Zipporah. The Isha Kushit, the dark woman, which may be a euphemism here. Some say he had another wife, that he married the king of Ethiopia's widow on his way to Yitro. Anyway, whoever his wife was at this time had to be left because Moshe was in the continual state of Sinai. in a continual state of contact with God. And when everyone else was told to go back to their tents, Moshe was told to remain with God. He had to be celibate. But great prophets, even Miriam and Aaron, wouldn't dream of being celibate. It's not a Jewish ideal. But when you're at Moshe's level, you stop eating and drinking and everything for 40 days and nights, then you're at that level. And Moshe is the most humble of all men, meaning he's the most other-centered, as God himself is called humble. Not that God says, I'm really not worth much. Or not that God says, oh, if someone else had my abilities, he could do better. No, that doesn't make sense. God is called an anav, meaning that God, at his most powerful, is concerned with the weakest. As we say in the prayers after Shabbat, Motzai Shabbat. Every place you find God's greatness, Kedulato, Shama Tamotzi Invenuto. There you find his humility. What does it mean, humility? Concern with the other-centeredness. And that's Moshe. So how could you accuse Moshe of being bad to his wife, of not being considerate? There's no one more other-centered than Moshe. When the people try to kill him, he tells God, don't wipe them out or wipe me out first. When God offers him a deal to make a new people from you, others, Turi Karta might say, God, you got a deal? Moshe says, absolutely not, wipe me out. So if Moshe separates from his wife, they should know it's because it has to be that way, not because he's insensitive to her pain. Okay? Then, he says, Moshe sees me direct, not in a dream, not with obscure visions, direct, like a person speaking to another person. And Miriam gets leprous for Lashon Hara, and Aaron is absolutely broken by this, and they asked Moshe to please pray for her, even though they spoke against Moshe. And Moshe gave a very short prayer, God, do heal her, I pray you. No long prayers, no great deal, just God, please heal her, but with all the kavanah in the world. And some of the commentaries say the people would resent it if Moshe just prayed, because he should do something. So Moshe had to show quick results, you don't just sit and pray. So he gave a short prayer, and then that God should do it. And some say he wouldn't make elaborate prayers for his own sister, that the people should think that his concern is just with his family. When she's done wrong, she gets punished too. But Moshe makes a quick prayer. And God said, at least let her be confined 7 days. You don't just overlook such a thing, that God is upset with you. And the people didn't journey. Again, we don't want to punish the sinner. We don't delight in condemning. If there's something has to be done, the people still respect and love Miriam. And they wait 7 days. And just as she had waited to see what would happen to Moshe, the Midrash says, Miriam waited and took care of Moshe. So now Moshe and the people waited for Miriam, even in her worst moment. And then they journeyed and went to the wilderness of Paran. And that finishes our Sedra, Beha'alotcha. And just a very brief word on the Haftorah, which is from Zechariah 2:14, 2:4-7, which predicts the end of days when the Jews come back, and God comes back, as I mentioned to Israel. Sing and rejoice, O daughter of Zion, for though I entered, I will dwell in your midst, says the Lord. I didn't think of it then. You have a very clear pasuk that God enters, which leads me to the feeling that you won't find God once you can come back to Israel. You won't find him anywhere else, if you can come back.
You?
Yeah.
I don't.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean to say that
They won't, if they can come back. Maybe somebody who, for whatever reason, can't come back can find God there. That's my theory. Because God says, I will dwell in your midst, daughter of Zion. And many nations will come to God then and become my people. Not just the Jews, but they will become like hangers on to the Jewish people. But I will dwell in your midst. God says, even though universal man is going to be redeemed through the Jewish people, the Jews are the firstborn who make subsequent births easier according to Hirsch. It is a universal religion, not like the Christians say that we're a particularist religion, but the universality is achieved by our being a unique nation of priests, the kingdom of priests and the holy nation. So the more we stress that the Jews do their unique job, the more we're for universal mankind. And then there's an image of the Jew as Joshua the high priest, who's awfully dirty and sullied after the Crusades, after the pogroms, after the Holocaust, after USSR. The Jew is very dirty and broken and in bad shape. But God says it's like pulling a brand almost burned up out of the fire, and Satan is now repelled, and Jerusalem is on top again. And the angel said, take the soiled garments from upon him. No longer the persecuted creature of the desert, of the ghetto. But now the Jew will be with clean clothes, with beautiful clothes, with blooming fields in Galilee. The Jew will be in the modern state of Israel. Behold, I've caused your iniquity to pass from you, but you must clothe yourself with pure garments. God may give you the garments. God will give you the land, but it's up to you to make them pure garments, to purify himself internally. And they put the pure mitre on his head and gave him garments. And the angel of the Lord remained standing. The angels in general are called standing beings. And God says, I will give you, we'll see soon, walkers among these standing beings. And God says, if you walk in my ways, this idea of the human being is a progressive being, not a stander like the angels, and keep my charge and judge my house and guard my courtyards, then you will have free access among those up here. First, he has to straighten himself out. Then he can deal with messianic and angelic realms. And you, Joshua the high priest in his dirty clothes, you and your companions to sit before you, the remnant who's going to come back to Israel, are men worthy of miracles, because you're going to bring my servant. You will bring the Messiah. And there's a stone with 7 eyes, reminiscent of the menorah, and eventually Israel will return, the iniquity of the land will disappear. And on that day, says the Lord of hosts, again, that God has a huge plan, a huge organization, Hashem Tzvakot. And part of that plan is every man will invite his neighbor under his vine and under his fig tree. That's why the Rambam, who, according to his medical opinion, said fruit is bad for you, said grapes and figs are good for you. It's hard to conceive that the Bible would praise being in a place where you're going to eat stuff that's bad for you. So the Rambam does recommend grapes and figs, though he condemns most other fruit. Then the angel came again and wakened me like a man wakened from his sleep, the Jews coming out of the concentration camp. He said, what do you see? I looked and he saw a menorah all of gold, as we explained before, and it's 7 lamps and 7 tubes and olive trees by it. And he said, what do these mean, my Lord? And the angel said, don't you understand? That these are the source of Jewish power. Temporarily, we may have to have armies and we have to be a model nation with everything like every other nation. But what does God say? This is the word of God to Zerubbabel as they're about to return. Not by military force and not by physical strength, but by my spirit, says the Lord of hosts. Who are you, great mountain? Before Zerubbabel, you'll sink to a plain. He'll bring out the best stone with shoutings of grace, grace to it. So this whole process of lighting the menorah, that the Jew is to enlighten the world by combining the Torah with the world in himself, which we discuss in the Sedra, is brought to its messianic culmination in our Haftorah, may it be soon, from Zechariah. That's it. Okay. Any questions or comments? No. Same time, same station next week. First, we have Kimitzi and Teitzei Torah, Devar Hashem Yerushalayim. The word of Torah will go out of Jerusalem. The word of God from Jerusalem has to be sent out, taken out. Not everybody will come here. So there has to be this flow of people taking the word out, but always keeping their focus on coming back and so forth. Something like that. And it's funny that God chose us. Of all the generations, many thousands of years of generations, and millions of Jews through the world. Yeah, somehow we're from the small group, one from a family, one from a tribe, as the Torah says, who have come back here. It's an awesome responsibility. And often, again, that problem of the person in the high place feeling discriminated against because he can't get the lower rewards, which are so quick and obvious. Like the great little soul person, the great little genius in school, feeling bad that he's not the captain of the baseball team. And everybody's focused on the captain of the baseball team, like that nonsense when you land in Boston, welcome to the home of the Bruins and the Celtics. It's ridiculous. It's the home of Harvard Children's Medical Center, Reb Soloveitchik, the Rebbe. Boston is wonderful, great things, but they focus on the trivial. So this is the problem.
Celtics aren't doing so bad.
It's not important. Who cares which bunch of highly developed monkeys who can kick or throw a little ball better wins? It's all trivial. And then the Israelis adopt these silly, trivial value systems of the West. Actresses and baseball players and soccer players become the heroes. People of relatively trivial accomplishment and little depth. But this is a problem. We here, who are the chosen few that come back and start this great messianic process, see the immediate accomplishments and great results of the people in America where there's so much opportunity and things go so easily. And we don't see maybe the long, long range, very deep consequences of our coming here. We don't see maybe what our great-great-great-grandchildren will be. Whereas out there, what your great-great-great-grandchildren are likely to be is not Jewish. Marx comes from Rashi. So, L'man yirbu yamechem v'nei v'nechem al hadam Hashem yishbal Hashem ha'avosechem l'sisem kol shma ha'aretz. That not just your days can multiply anywhere. You know what you are already. You could be in any country in the world and you'll be a religious Jew and a good Jew. but that your days and the days of your sons should multiply and be great, is on the land, the earth, not the metaphysical concept of Israel, that very dirt, that very land of Israel, which God promised to give us, is the only place where you can put together heaven and earth. The Jew can be a disembodied being in the ghetto. He can be an overly earthly being in California. But here is days where you combine heaven and earth, touching heaven, touching earth, as Rabbi Avigdor put it, Avigdor Cohen. But heaven's on top.
Amen.